When the judge asked if I had anything to say, I almost laughed. Because what could I possibly say after hearing my husband, the man who once kissed my forehead and called me his anchor, stand in open court and boast that he planned to live off my fortune? People chuckled, cameras clicked, and in that moment, something inside me cracked. Not from the humiliation, but from the realization that he'd been rehearsing this scene for years. I looked at him. The polished suit, the confident smirk. The same man who'd once promised he'd protect everything my father built, and all I felt was a quiet, burning clarity. He thought he'd stripped me of power. He didn't notice the envelope resting on my lap. Inside, it wasn't revenge. It was the truth, patient, precise, and far sharper than love had ever been. My name is Bernadine Lowell, and that was the moment I stopped believing silence meant weakness. Boston Family Court smelled of old paper and too strong coffee. October light sliced through the high windows in thin gray beams. It felt like someone had stripped the color out of the room. I sat rigid in the plaintiff's chair, fingers curled around the corner of a cream envelope that rested heavy on my lap. Nobody met my eyes. They preferred the spectacle. Across the table, he rose, Charles, smooth, composed, the kind of man who could make a courtroom feel like a lecture hall. He smiled the practiced smile, the one that had once convinced me he understood nuance and loyalty. Now it landed like a coin dropped into a jar. Deliberate, audible. "Your Honor," he said, voice measured, the kind that fills seats and headlines. "I believe I'm entitled to live comfortably off my wife's fortune. I supported her entire career." Murmurs threaded the benches. A reporter adjusted a pen. Someone coughed. He looked at me then, and the look said everything his words didn't. Here I am, clever, right. I let him have it, let him perform. Judge Abrams watched us both, silver hair twisted into a strict knot, expression unreadable. When she asked if I wished to speak, the question sat in the air like a dare. I shook my head. "Not yet, Your Honor." Silence settled until even the sound of a pen scratching seemed loud. He continued. Grand gestures, references to contribution, to partnership, to sacrificial devotion. Every line calculated to win sympathy and ownership in the same breath. I listened, counting the small, ordinary lies. He had no idea the case he was making would be the one to undo him. 3 years earlier, I met him at a financial law conference in Boston Harbor Hotel, just weeks after my father's death. I was holding together Lowell Properties through endless inheritance disputes when he appeared. Calm, confident, knowing far too much. "You're the one who restructured Lowell's portfolio after your father's passing, right?" "That was bold," he said. He knew every number, every clause in our trust, every fear I tried to hide behind balance sheets. We talked until the staff dimmed the lights. For the first time in months, I felt seen. He took me to dinner at Menton, sent flowers to my office with a card. For the woman who built her own empire. It wasn't romance, it was validation, and I mistook it for love. 3 months later, he arrived with a legal consulting contract to protect the company. He spoke with such precision, identifying the same weak points I'd confessed over wine. I signed, thinking he was my ally. I found out later he'd once worked for the rival firm that tried to buy our largest property while my father was dying. I should have walked away. But when loneliness lasts long enough, even manipulation feels like safety. After the wedding, he said he'd modernize everything: house, accounts, future. I let him. Weeks later, a bank letter confirmed 22% of Lowell Properties had been transferred to Grayline Ventures. I never signed anything. "You must have forgotten, sweetheart," he said, smiling. But I hadn't. I checked the file, my name perfectly signed, metadata showing it was created 2 weeks after the date on record. The law firm said it looked too perfect, a scanned signature, not human. Later, I saw who uploaded it. Charles Illegal. He claimed he didn't remember. That night, I locked my office door for the first time, copied every file to a private USB, and realized the man I married wasn't helping me protect my legacy. He was rewriting it. I hadn't slept in days. His laugh from that party replayed behind my eyes. After 2 weeks of gnawing silence, I called Marlene Ruiz. Quiet, relentless. The kind of auditor who makes numbers confess. "Look into Greyline Ventures," I said. Careful not to explain too much. "Be discreet." 3 days later, she sat across from me with a stack of files and a look that could freeze the room. "Bernadine," she said, "Greyline's hollow. No employees, no payroll, no tax activity. Just transfers. Your money." "How much?" 2.7 million, routed through 4 accounts, all leading back to Charles Lowell III. My throat closed. Marlene slid an email toward me. "Prepare sale conditions once I control majority shares." Everything snapped into place. His talk about tax optimization, the smooth smiles, the calm logic. He wasn't managing our wealth. He was positioning himself to own it. I copied every file to a USB, watching my reflection on the laptop screen. The woman staring back wasn't the one who had once mistaken manipulation for care. She was ready to fight, with precision, not emotion. A month later, he insisted on a 10-year anniversary party at the Fairmont Copley. Crystal chandeliers fractured light across the ballroom as he raised his glass. "To my brilliant wife," he announced, "and to us, soon-to-be co-owners of Lowell Properties." Applause. My pulse roared louder than the clinking glasses. Afterward, Harold Quinn, my father's old advisor, pulled me aside. "Are you sure you know everything about Charles?" "Why?" "I represented his ex-wife 10 years ago. She lost everything. He forged her consent on a trust." Back home, I opened the state archives. His name appeared beneath a headline: "Widow of real estate attorney accuses husband of fraudulent transfers." 2013. Same face, same smile. I labeled my USB, Evidence 1, Greyline. Evidence 2, Email chain. Evidence 3, Article 2013. If he'd turned love into a transaction, I'd turned justice into a contract. I walked into Federal Plaza on a Monday, carrying a cream envelope thick with copies of Greyline files. The room smelled like bleach and bureaucracy. Fluorescent lights hummed. Elias Ung sat behind a small table, hands folded, the kind of face that had seen too many lies to be surprised. "Mrs. Lowell, your husband's name came up before," he said, voice flat. "Not under fraud, under advisory work. He's clever. But clever doesn't mean untouchable." I slid him the contract. He adjusted his glasses, scrolled, then pinched the bridge of his nose. "You see this? The metadata. Created 6 months ago, edited 3 weeks ago. Not 2021 like the signature claims. Can we use it?" I asked. "Not yet." Elias replied. "He has to use it himself in court. Then it's intent to defraud." A chill ran through me at the implication, justice that needed a trap. A few days later, he returned with another file. He filed a preliminary petition under irreconcilable differences. He references the prenup you supposedly didn't sign. He's confident. Then he played me the recovered email. "Once the divorce is filed, she won't have time to stop the liquidation." Elias looked up. "Will you let him think he's winning?" I thought of a child learning to ride in the plaza outside, small hands steadying a wobbling parent's grip. I smiled. He always loved hearing himself talk. I'll give him an audience. Back at Lowell Properties, I opened my father's old safe and found a velvet-wrapped USB, a note in his hand. "Backup agreements. Do not modify." My chest tightened when I plugged it in. The folders were pristine, original partnership agreements from 2019-2022. Untouched. Full metadata. I opened partnership agreement, PDF. In the edit log, edited by Charles L's Legal. Modified, February 3, 2023. I sent an encrypted copy to Elias. That night he called, a rare edge of excitement in his voice. "We've got him." The signature log contains a unique hash from software that didn't exist until 2023. Forensic gold. He told me to show weakness. He needs to feel safe. Let him think you're unprepared. 3 days later, Charles walked in with a fat binder. I've decided to file, Bernie, he said, setting it on the table. You'll thank me one day for making this clean. Have you already prepared your evidence? I asked. Of course, he said, smiling as if the world belonged to him. When he left, I placed a new envelope in the drawer, printed forensic reports, the metadata pages, and the FBI authorization. On the front, I wrote, plain and steady, for Judge Abrams, to be opened at the right time. Monday morning. Boston hung under a dull gray sky, rain whispering across the granite steps of the family court. Inside, the courtroom overflowed. Reporters, spectators, whispers curling between wooden benches. I sat in the front row, the cream envelope resting in my hands like a quiet heartbeat. Sometimes justice didn't roar. Sometimes it waited in silence. Charles entered with the kind of confidence that only deceit can polish. Gray tailored suit, red silk tie, hands in his pockets, smiling for the cameras as though this were his victory lap. He greeted the press, straightened his cufflinks, and took his seat beside his attorney. Your Honor, the lawyer began, voice smooth, rehearsed. My client has been a devoted husband and advisor. We will present evidence proving Mrs. Lowell never signed the prenuptial agreement. Accordingly, all shared assets should be divided equally. Judge Abrams gave a small nod. Proceed. Charles stood, clearing his throat, already savoring the sound of his own voice. For years, he began, I supported my wife while she managed her late father's company. She inherited everything, her house, her fortune, her legacy. I was the one who gave her balance, credibility, companionship. I ask only to live in comfort, off what we built together. Laughter flickered around the courtroom, quickly stifled. A camera clicked. He turned toward me, eyes gleaming. Bernadine, you owe me that much, don't you? I didn't blink. Watching him was like rewatching a film where the villain still doesn't know the ending's already written. Then he lifted the thick binder. Your Honor, I have the original document right here. He handed it to the judge with theatrical grace. She adjusted her glasses, flipping pages, brows drawn together. I spotted Elias Ung in the back row. He gave a single, deliberate nod. It was time. I stood. Your Honor, may I approach the bench? You may. I placed my envelope beside Charles's binder. I'd like you to verify the date and composition of the ink used on Mr. Lowell's documents. A ripple of surprise moved through the room. Judge Abrams raised an eyebrow. Go on. The digital pen used for his signature was released in 2023, I said evenly. The contract he presented is dated 2021. Silence fell, sharp, suspended. The judge turned to the forensic report I'd provided, stamped with the FBI's seal. She read for a moment, lips twitching. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed, a clear, genuine laugh. It cut through the air like a bell. Mr. Lowell, she said, still smiling. You're asking this court to believe you signed a document 2 years before the pen you used was even manufactured? Charles froze, color draining from his face. That's impossible. She forged it. She set me up. Judge Abrams lowered her glasses. Her tone was calm, measured. No, Mr. Lowell, you set yourself up. A wave of murmurs swept through the courtroom. Charles slammed his hand on the table, the sound hollow and desperate. 2 bailiffs stepped forward before he could take another breath. I met his eyes, my voice barely above a whisper. I told you once, Charles, silence can be powerful. Light spilled through the tall windows, striking the open envelope on the bench. For the first time, I saw justice not as something loud or distant, but as something real, tangible, and finally, mine. The moment the gavel struck, the room fractured into chaos. Voices, flashing bulbs, the shuffle of polished shoes on marble floors. 2 officers took hold of Charles's arms, leading him toward the side door. He didn't resist, just stared at the floor, the gray in his hair stark under the fluorescent lights. For a man who once believed silence was submission, he finally understood its weight. Reporters surged forward, calling his name, but I stayed seated. I wasn't watching the man being escorted out. I was watching the shadow of who I used to be leaving with him. Elias Ung crossed through the commotion, calm as ever. He handed me a folded paper stamped with the federal seal. The FBI will charge him with forgery, fraud, and attempted asset misappropriation, he said. He's done, I nodded. Will they find others? He sighed. We already did. 2 previous cases, same pattern, different women. He'll be facing federal time. A quiet breath left me. Not of triumph, but of release. From the open window drifted a soft gust that smelled faintly of rain and stone, the kind of air that follows a storm. Judge Abrams's voice cut through the noise. All marital asset claims from Mr. Lowell are dismissed. Mrs. Lowell retains full ownership of Lowell properties, and the court awards damages for legal and emotional distress. The hammer fell once more. That sound, 3 measured strikes, was the cleanest closure I'd ever heard. The press turned to me as the guards pushed Charles through the door. Mrs. Lowell, someone called out. How does it feel to win? I looked directly into the camera lenses and felt the question land heavy. It doesn't feel like winning, I said. It feels like correcting a mistake that should never have been made. For a heartbeat, no one said anything. Then pens scratched and shutters clicked, but I'd already turned away. Outside the courthouse, Marlene Ruiz waited beneath the stone archway, her coat buttoned to her chin. She smiled when she saw me. You really did it. I shook my head. No. The truth did it. She tilted her head slightly, her eyes softening. And that's why it's beautiful. The car pulled up, black and quiet. I stepped in, the door closing with a final, gentle thud. As we drove through Beacon Hill, sunlight broke through the clouds, laying a warm gold over the brownstone facades. For the first time in years, Boston looked alive again. I turned to the window, watching the reflection of the woman staring back. She wasn't the wife who once avoided confrontation, or the daughter afraid of disappointing a legacy. Her eyes were steady, clear. The city blurred past, the courthouse shrinking behind me, the past fading into distance. I pressed my fingertips against the envelope resting in my lap, the same one that had once trembled in my hands. Justice didn't roar, I thought, it whispered. And today, I finally heard it, 6 months later. The city felt different, quieter, somehow cleaner. My office at the newly formed Lowell Foundation for Financial Truth smelled of fresh paint and possibility. The walls were a soft cream. The wide windows overlooked Boston Public Garden, where winter sunlight spilled like a quiet benediction across the grass. For the first time in years, there was no one left to lie to me. A single envelope sat on my desk, white, thin, addressed in a hand I knew too well. Charles's handwriting was as neat as ever, the loops precise, the arrogance even in ink. I stared at it for a long moment before breaking the seal. Bernadine, I only wanted to live off your fortune. Charles, no excuses, no apologies, just a confession stripped bare? I smiled, not with malice, but with something closer to pity. At least once, he'd managed to tell the truth. I folded the letter carefully and slid it into the top drawer, next to my wedding ring, the band I'd removed the night the lies became undeniable. And now, I said softly, you're living off my taxes. Outside, the church bells began to chime, their sound drifting over the common. Afternoon light slanted through the glass, brushing across an old photograph on the wall, my father and me, standing in front of the original Lowell Properties sign, the day we cut the ribbon together. His hand rested on my shoulder, his eyes proud and certain. He used to tell me, wealth means responsibility. For years I thought he meant money. Today, I understood he'd meant truth, because wealth built on deceit was never truly yours to keep, and justice, when earned, carried its own quiet kind of weight. I turned back to my desk. The laptop hummed softly. A new case file glowed on the screen. Claire Morton, 49, Maine. Husband transferred farmland into his sole name before divorce. I studied the summary, feeling the familiar tightening in my chest. Not anger, but purpose. All right, I murmured, clicking open the folder. Let's start with her case. In the silence that followed, the office clock ticked steadily, the sound blending with the faint hum of the city outside. Somewhere below, children laughed, a trolley bell rang, and the world went on, indifferent, but somehow lighter. I reached for a pen and began to write notes in the margin, careful, deliberate, the same way I'd once prepared my own evidence, line by line, until the truth had nowhere left to hide. When I paused, the afternoon sun had shifted. It fell across the desk, catching the edge of another envelope, the same cream-colored paper that had once sat on a courtroom bench. Its corner glowed in the light, a thin blade of gold against the wood. I didn't move it. I just watched it, the way you might watch something sacred without daring to touch. It reminded me that justice wasn't loud. It didn't arrive with applause or vengeance. It simply waited for the right moment to be seen. And sometimes, it took the shape of a small envelope, silent, unassuming, and bright enough to outshine everything that had once tried to bury it.